The last bit of my paper I call a peculiar mode of thinking. I'll here elaborate on some aspects of what I call a peculiar form of thinking that has come to dominate this discourse. As I've already made clear, thoughtful engagement is treated as a kind of enemy, and this is certainly the experience of many clinicians working in gender services. The wish to think over time and understand why this particular child has developed in this particular way comes to be seen as an expression of transphobia. This creates a paranoid universe, a world where you are either with me or against me. That is, there is no room for a mind that just wants to think about things. This intolerance of doubt and thought that characterizes certain kinds of the intolerance of doubt and thought that characterizes certain kinds of mental state here leaks out and becomes a force in the social realm. The term transphobia has for many in mental health services, psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, a particular unfortunate resonance, named the homophobia that is a part of our history. I have in mind that dark history of conversion therapies for homosexuals, particularly, though not only in the USA. I believe the fear of repeating this has interfered with our capacity to think through these issues and has led us to turning a blind eye. But it is vital to distinguish between conversion therapy and a wish to think. As I see it, the rapid decisions as regards the provision of medical and surgical intervention is itself a form of conversion therapy. Like the past so-called treatments for homosexuality, it seeks to refashion the body as the only permissible solution to painful conflicts about gender. It brings about transformations in the body, converting it in order to satisfy insufficiently examined individual, family, and social agendas. Lastly, the possession of a particular identity is taken as supplying an individual with a peculiar kind of higher authority. If, for example, a person says, as a gay man, or as a Jewish man, or a disabled person, or a black person, or whatever, it would be quite reasonable to accept that such a person, because of their specific experiences, will enrich any discussion of the world with which they identify. But this does not bring entitlement to an unquestioned higher authority. That is, by belonging to X group or Y group, my views as to what is true about the world, particularly about the group to which I belong, remains as open to doubt and question as the views of any other person. This assumed higher authority, exceptionalism, exhibits also a kind of entitlement that can in part be derived from the link between a particular identity and victimhood. That is, an entitlement not to be questioned. That is, a demand to be exempt from the ordinary canons as to what counts as good judgment. There can be no personal or group sovereignty as to what counts as true. This is here, I believe, there is here, I think, a link to the attack on truth value that is so characteristic of our age. One wonders if the peculiar intransigence of these beliefs is at times a result of the awareness of doubt that is disowned and projected into the other, who then must be silenced. If we take it as a fact that gender identity is socially constructed, or largely socially constructed, then there is a paradox at the heart of this phenomenon. The apparent freedom or liberation that it expresses is totally undermined by locating all possibility of change only concretely in the material alteration of the body rather than the mind. There's been a peculiar regression in thinking. In our contemporary world, we are generally more tolerant, even celebrate a certain gender fluidity in terms of gender and sexuality. We, at least I suppose in urban areas, are less interested in who a person goes to bed with, less bothered by a man being somewhat effeminate or a woman being somewhat unfeminine. But this exists alongside a toleration of certain limitations arising from the body. But in the ideology of the militant trans lobbies, there's a peculiar rigidity of gender identity, coupled with a belief in the total fluidity of the body, a most peculiar reversal. This is coupled with a peculiar essentialist mode of thought, that is, gender identity is confused with anatomical sex, and so is seen as biological and fixed rather than psychological, social, and fluid. B. Campbell, a well-known British writer and feminist, wrote, "The sexual revolution wrought by feminist and gay activism has, of course, changed the political landscape in which trans lives can be lived. It coexists with the commodification of gender archetypes and the reinstatement of a seemingly polarized and parodic masculinity and femininity." Here I've described how thinking becomes the enemy to be destroyed. Nothing should stand in the way of an unobstructed pathway to irreversible medical and then surgical procedures that result in lifetime medication where we do not know what the consequences are.